Okay, so the thing I'd want you to know at this point is the way I am getting the index by passing it in is just a very simple way to do it. And as I kind of alluded to before, as your tables get more and more complex, you have to think about other more efficient ways to do what we're about to do. And so here's what I mean by that. And this is what I want you to start to be able to do in DevTools as well, is each of these buttons now have event listeners on them. What you can also do is just as somebody clicks, run a query. And this is where in the beginning I was writing document.get our document query selector. I could then query to see which of these has been selected. That's the other way I could do it. And then I wouldn't have to necessarily have an event listener on each one. So in the long run, this might be less efficient based on what I'm trying to accomplish. But each of them, and this is where I was heading, if you right click and you hit inspect, it'll take you back to the elements. And when you're on the button over on this side, if you don't see it, drop down and say event listener. So what you can see is each of them has an event listener. Oh, I clicked. Did I click? Oh, I was like, why doesn't delete? Because we haven't written it yet. So this one as well, right? So there is also down here on the, that was the second one. That's why. So it's up here somewhere, wherever it's at. So if I click here, so that's the other thing is like trying to find it, just go in, hit inspect. Okay, so then we can see that that event listener is on there. So imagine with a large amount of rendered data, which of course you would do something called pagination, where you would only show a certain number of records. But even then, right, that can get cumbersome. The other technique, I just want to tell you about it, even though we're not going to use it right now, we could totally use it, and there may be a need for us to use it in the future, is we could do something like this. We can actually, let me show you this. It's called the data attribute in HTML that we can read from JavaScript. And using this data attribute is really handy. So as for us, we in our side of our button, it's a simple syntax. It's basically just adding attributes inside the HTML that we can then lean into for JavaScript. So we could say data index number. It doesn't matter. We get to make these up all we want. I could just say data index, okay, and then set that based on the same way I'm doing it now. And then in my code, it's kind of a little different, but I would say data set dot data in number index, okay, based on it rendering. So you can see how it does camel case when you have, so you can do that. You can totally do that. That would be the other way you could use the data attribute in your code to also do what we're doing here, but we're just trying to keep it simple. Okay. All right. So now that we have it, what do we want to do? Right. So now comes the part. So we got this part done, right? So if we said we got the reference to the array, we have that, right? For the current row, we have that. So now we need to populate the input fields. Okay. So how do we do that? Let's think about that for a minute. So over here, right, what do we know about this field, right? If we hit inspect, we know it's setting, let's try it again, inspect, there it is. We know it's setting inside the form, right? We know before in our code that we actually reference the value off of the target though, right? E.target off of the event target for submit on the form. But if you remember when I was telling you about how to reference the values in the field, I gave you another technique. And it was this, that because in our code, we have, okay, we have access to a constant that is pointing to that form, we can just type form, okay? And when we do that, because it's this getting by ID pulls the entire structure of that DOM structure of what's rendered. Okay. It's kind of cool because these are actually arrays, each of these elements. So I could do form 0. Oh wow, check that out. So it reaches inside, right? Grabs its first input. Okay. It doesn't create, right, for the rest of these. There's other ways we could get access to them, but in this case, because it's a form and it's referencing the input, right? So okay. All right. So knowing that, here's what I want you to do. I want you to attempt on your own, before I show you, right? For what we would do in here, now that we have access to this index, what do we do to populate those input fields? Okay, again, pause here. I'm actually going to stop the video because what I want you to do is I want you to try it on your own. This should be based on what we've said. If you don't get it, then do a comment in the README file telling me what you tried. Right? This is for 22. Right, so I need to update that content. All right, so we'll pause here, pick it up on the next one.